All right. So just a quick rundown of sort of the schedule or what I first see us working on over the next 7 weeks. So the first 2 weeks, I want to talk about some good tools to help generate better data sets. I'll talk about that a little bit more today as well, but so we won't really get into StyleGAN immediately. So if you do have to play a little bit of catch up and just sort of like catch up on how to do training or how to do other things in Colab, you've got a couple weeks before then. Again, I'll cover some of those links and other materials in like a couple of minutes. So I want to cover those two things because I think data sets and making good data sets are really, really important to StyleGAN. That's not to say that you're required to build your own data set for this course, although I think many of you will want to. So we'll go over some tools to do that. And then the last 5 weeks, I think we'll really dig into sort of various components of StyleGAN. So we'll look at latent spaces. I know many of us have done latent space interpolations, but we'll dig in a little bit deeper. We'll look at Z space, W space, various ways to interpolate through those spaces, lots of things. So again, this won't be a super coding heavy class, but I do want to cover sort of like what some of this actually looks like under the hood, because I think some of you will be interested in that topic. So in some cases, like I'll always have some material that no matter what, every week, like you'll get something out of if you're not interested in the code. But for those of you that are, you'll get some additional like little bit of detail behind the scenes. So week 4, we'll look at projection and feature vectors. Again, I've covered this in some classes before, but I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into what's actually happening, ways to improve your projections, ways to really explore feature vectors, those sort of things. Week 5, we'll do audio reactive. So I think we'll go through Hans Brewer's notebook, but not just sort of like cover the bases. He's got a really long article about how to tweak various things to do really cool stuff. So I think we'll actually go through that whole experience. We'll look at how to like tie all of these various like audio pieces to different levers within StyleGAN. So I think there's some stuff that does network bending in there. We'll look at how to maybe do some source separation of an audio track, right? So we'll get some bass line, we'll get some drums, and we'll get like different components of the sound, and we'll be able to attach those to different pieces. So I think this will be a fun one, and like we'll explore sort of all the various ways to like do some audio reactive stuff. But we'll go through his notebook because it's pretty thorough and like honestly much better than I could build myself. Week 6, I think we'll look at network bending and network blending. So this is sort of like how can we take the various levels or layers of a StyleGAN network and begin to play with each individual layer. Network bending is a really cool tool, and network blending is some fun things I've seen people like. I've done a lot with just sort of like splitting layers of various things and being able to do different stuff. So I think there's a lot of cool tools there. And then because this doesn't really cover everything that I think everyone wants to cover, I'm going to leave week 7 as either overflow or just maybe some opportunities. Like I often find that stuff gets released in the middle of these classes and it's like, hey, cool, this is really cool, let's cover this. So I'm going to leave that just sort of as an open time. If there are things you've seen or things you've heard about that you want me to cover, like please let me know and I'm happy to add that to this list. Like the nice thing about this class is like there's no set schedule, like there's no like requirement that you must learn this thing. So it's kind of up to you. If you see stuff you like and want to play with more, like we can always make adjustments to the schedule. I'm also happy like if everyone's just like, you know what, we don't care about network blending, like then I'll just record a video, post it, and we'll move on to something else. So I would say like please feel free to speak up about what you're interested in. I know there's some stuff like we could look at, like I could probably do another 4 or 5 weeks of this class, but I wanted to keep it short because I know long classes can get burnt out a little bit. But I have a lot of ideas of things we could cover, and maybe like as we get closer to that time, I'll maybe reach out and just sort of say like, hey, here's some things we could cover for the last week. I think some people are interested in something like being able to do real-time stuff, which is pretty challenging unless you have your own GPU rig. So I might try just to cover that in a video and share it with people. But again, if there's stuff you've seen and you're like, hey, how is someone doing this? And it's not covered here, I'm happy to maybe sort of like walk through some of it. And then lastly, if you've ever been a part of our classes before, we always try to do a show and tell that's like a couple weeks after the class is over. I find that's a nice sort of motivation to finish a project. And we do it over like a YouTube live stream, so you can invite your friends or like other people to come and check stuff out. So we'll schedule that more as we get closer to that time, because I do think it's a lot of fun. And again, it's a nice like little bit of a kick in the ass in order to just get stuff like up and out. Also, you will undoubtedly hear my cat if you haven't before. This is Bug. She's already yelling at me. I'm going to hold her for a little bit. You might meet the other one. She doesn't yell as much, but she does demand cuddles by chewing on cables. Yeah, so she's a little kid actually, even though she's like 13 years old now. All right. Also, if you've taken my classes before or taken classes with Leah and I, usually they're like an hour and a half. I've extended this one a little bit longer for a couple reasons. Is one, I feel like I'm always rushing the last 20 minutes of the class. So this gives me a little bit more of an overflow. Also, I think it's probably helpful if there's just like people have immediate questions or that sort of thing. So I'm going to try to keep all the lectures to about an hour and a half, and we will take breaks. So around the hour mark, we'll do breaks. Um, but I would encourage you, if you have questions, to go ahead and ask them toward the end of class. Obviously, like if there's something in the middle that we're working through and you have questions about that, like feel free to ask. But we can also save the last 30 minutes for more in-depth questions. And then also, because I know there are some people in here who are really interested in the code that goes on under the hood. If we don't have a lot of questions that week, we can also maybe look at some of the code that underlines it, and I can sort of like quickly sketch out what various things do. So if you are interested in sort of manipulating it or just digging under the hood, we can look at that. As a part of these courses, we also do co-working sessions. So usually there's about 2 per week. Those are usually about an hour each. You're welcome to show up whenever you want to during those times. You don't have to show up at all, they're optional. But I do find that they're really helpful if you have detailed questions or if you want to like walk through something that is new that you haven't seen before. So it's a great way to just get more questions answered, get help with your specific project. If there are things you're running into that don't seem to work right, it's very likely not you. It's very likely that I have broken something and I need to fix it. So we can do that in these co-working sessions. So I've got a link to the survey here. What I recommend you do is if you just actually maybe during break, it'd be great if people could just fill this out during break. So I've got some times listed when I'm available. These are set to US Eastern. So I believe if you switch this, they will shift. Yeah, so make sure you set your correct time here. I will try to probably move it around a little bit every couple weeks just to make sure that everyone gets a time that they're available in. I know that some of these times are hard for people in different locations, but just try to pick some times you are available. Right now, this is set up for just this week, but sort of extrapolate this into like, here's when I'm generally available. And that way, like I'll take a look at the answers like over the next day or two, and then I'll be able to just sort of pick some times, and I'll add them to to everyone's calendar just so that they exist. So if you want to join, you can. If you don't, there's no problems. There's no requirement to show up for those. It's just additional time for us to chat and me to get ideas and like help you work through things. Cool. And then so materials for the class. So there is a class site. Right now it's just a Google Doc page. And this is going to be sort of like where we'll link all of the slides, all the recordings. Oh, thanks, Dusk. I am not screen sharing, and I definitely should be. Can you see my screen now? Cool. Okay. Yeah, sorry. I linked all of these in. Okay, so let me just make sure we went through these. Cool. So class structure. So there's a link to the survey here if you didn't have it. I'll also post it in chat. Yeah, so materials. So there is a Google Doc that will be sort of our class site that's just shared with you. It's also linked to in the top of our Slack channel. So if you go ahead and click that link, you'll be able to find it there. Here is where I will put all of sort of the slides and recordings for every class. So again, slides will go up hopefully the day before class starts, sometimes the hour before class starts. Recordings will go up as soon as I have them back from Zoom. I'll list homework. Sometimes during Q&A, there's also like links that I'll grab and like post. And I'll try to link to those here as well so people have access to them. So this will sort of be our running archive for the class. So if you do miss a week, you're welcome to ask in the Slack channel, but also this will sort of be our latest up-to-date place for everything. And obviously, like the recordings are essentially yours, so you should just feel free to use them at whatever time you want. Because some of this stuff does take like repetition to sort of learn. You might want to come back to the recordings a couple times over the course of a week to just sort of learn like, okay, what did he do here? Okay, I can follow that, or like, let me follow these steps. So definitely recommend, sort of listening or the first time and then trying to follow along step by step with the recordings after. Because sometimes it's nice, you can slow it down, speed it up, pause, jump around, that sort of thing. So our Slack channel, if you've never been a part of our classes, we do have a private Slack channel. I just pull this up here real quick. So you should see the Advanced StyleGAN class. If you're not in that one, just DM me either over here or email me or DM me on Slack, and I'll get you added to it. I think everyone is here. I'm just looking at the number here, but just in case I miss someone, let me know. So again, I think there's no requirement to use Slack. I know many people have 50 Slack channels now. So, feel free to use it as much or as little as you want. I do find it's helpful just for some asynchronous communication. Maybe you're running into bugs and you need my help, and co-working session is, 3 days away and you want to figure stuff out now, please feel free to post in there. Also, you're always welcome to DM me over Slack. I prefer Slack DMs over emails or other things just because email gets lost very quickly. If I don't respond to you immediately over Slack, give me a couple hours and then just follow up if it's been a day or two. Sometimes I see stuff and I'm like, okay, I'll respond to that in an hour, and then I forget about it. So please don't feel like I'm ignoring you. Just bug me if I miss things. Totally fine, and I will never take offense to it. So that's our Slack channel. There are many other channels in the Slack that I use. You're welcome to post wherever you want to. The one that I think most people are interested in at least checking out is there's a share projects channel where people can sort of just share what they've been working on. Some of those people are in this class, some of those people are not, so go ahead and post there. There's also a StyleGAN channel. This is just for general StyleGAN questions, and it's generally people asking me about bugs or other things, and I don't respond to everyone just because I'm very busy these days, but I try to. But you might also, if you have an answer to one of these people's questions and you want to respond, I'm very thankful for that, but there's no requirement to. But you also might just want to look in here, because sometimes people are talking about stuff that is either advanced or just some interesting things. There are a couple folks, I know Hans, who did the audio reactive notebook, he posts in here. A couple other people who are very knowledgeable in the space will post in here every now and then. So you might just want to sort of keep an eye on it every now and then and see what's what. It's not the right window. So you can email me, but in general, you will get much faster responses over Slack. And I would also say, if you have a question, posting it in our Slack channel, our private one, is generally good, because if you have that question, it's very likely a couple other people have that question as well. And it's just easier if sometimes people are shy about asking questions. I feel dumb asking this, and I promise you there are no dumb questions in this. All of this stuff is new and not always the easiest to understand. So please ask as many questions as you want. It's part of the reason that you're in this class is so that I can respond to you. So please ask questions, and I would say start by putting them in our private Slack channel. You're welcome to DM me, but in general, I think it's just more helpful if it's visible and open. So some people have been working on projects that are maybe not safe for work, and maybe they will DM me, and that's totally appreciated. I'll also say, if you are working on a sort of a not safe for work project, please tag it and put it in a thread. That way people can sort of, if they want to skip it, they can. That way we're not just posting AI porn in our general channel, because also people might be at work. So, just be considerate of other people's time if you are posting in the general channel, and try to, flag stuff if you think it's going to be potentially controversial. So also I might link to YouTube recordings, although this class is one of the reasons I'm teaching this class is to get recordings of this material up, because I don't have a lot of stuff about this. But you may, I may say oh, I've covered that before, or I won't cover it in this class, but you can go take a look at this video. So we'll be posting to those. I think most of you are aware of the channel. YouTube is not the easiest to search by, so I will try to do that work for you. But yeah, so I may post to some of those links, and there's a lot here. And as I mentioned, the public channel, you should feel free to post anywhere publicly. Cool, so objectives for this class. I think I've sort of covered this when we talked about the schedule, but my hope for this is that people are be able to improve their StyleGAN models. That's number one, the first thing. So the first couple weeks we'll talk about how to create better data sets, because data sets are one of the hearts of these particular projects. We'll understand latent spaces better. to the point of where like it's not just like some dimensional thing. It's like you can actually look at the numbers and sort of understand what they mean. And then obviously one of the big things is like extending StyleGAN. There's so many places that are working on various StyleGAN additions or forks of StyleGAN that I think are really, really worth using. And then obviously like, part of it is just like, how do I build this into my own practice? Like, is it connecting it to audio? Is it connecting it to data? All the various things that might be cool to play with and sort of see. I think it's really, really important to get the most usage out of your trained models. From like a purely environmental standpoint, like training a model is not the best. It uses a lot of energy. So from my perspective, like a good use of that energy is to extend it further and further, right? How do we get more than just a day or two of fun out of our projects and actually extend this even further? So for me, this is like also like political, I guess, in some ways, but also just like I think it's a valuable usage of our time to understand all the ways in which we can get the most out of our models. So yeah. And as I mentioned, like I think there's so many people that are using StyleGAN as the base for new tools and new experiences. And I think the more you know about how StyleGAN operates and like how it's used, the easier it is to quickly adapt to these things, right? So my hope is that maybe at the end of this class, if someone like the week after this class ends, puts up a new model and sort of says like, okay, I'm using these layers to do this, and I'm using these layers to do this, you can be like, okay, I understand what they're talking about, and I can sort of like pick that up and use it in my own work. Yeah, so part of it's just like learning how this thing works under the hood a little bit more and being able to apply that to our own work. Again, for those of you who are interested in the most out of this class, like I would say for this class, like you're looking at, a couple hours every week of sort of homework. Because we're not really going to be focusing too much on making our own data sets or training, it'll probably be a little bit less intense than other classes. But I also would imagine many of you will probably be wanting to train your own data sets at the same time that you're doing this stuff. So, balance that out with your own work. Most cases, I will give you all the materials you need for that week, and it's just sort of like walk through this thing, apply it to your own data set, apply it to your own model, and see what you make out of it. And some of you will want to take that further. Some of you will be busy one week and you'll just say like, okay, I'm just going to follow this, or like I'm going to skip this week because it's not really that interesting to me and move on. Obviously, we're all adults with our own schedules, so you do you. But I would say, the more time you spend with these things and the more questions you have, the more you'll learn and get out of this class. So software. So obviously Slack is, well, it's optional. It's really helpful for me if I can post updates there and not have to email everyone. So I'd say like check Slack at least once a week, like maybe right before class starts, just to make sure that you haven't missed anything. And then all of the material for this course will be done in Google Colab. So I personally very much recommend Colab Pro. It is $10 a month, and I believe it is now officially legally available in everyone's country that they've mentioned here. So there's no weird end arounds you have to do to like get it to work. At $10 a month, you get much better GPUs, so everything will run a little bit faster. It's worth it. I know giving money to Google feels kind of icky sometimes, but it's definitely worth it compared to trying to use other tools. You don't need Pro for this class because we won't be doing training, but it's very likely there's a chance you could get a GPU that won't work with StyleGAN. Probably not, but for the most part, just beware of that. Yeah, so we're going to be using Colab, I believe. Yeah, so I'll cover, like, if you're not familiar with Colab, I've got a course on Colab that you can watch and sort of pick up some material there. Okay, come here. So as I mentioned, like this is quote unquote an advanced class. So one thing to note is that we won't really cover training in this class, in part just because I don't have really anything new to say about training. So if you are interested in training, I'll link you to some materials. Oh, so Grant asked about Paperspace. So you're welcome to use Paperspace. Paperspace is definitely an option. Because we're using Colab and they're in notebooks, you'll just basically have to convert like the Colab commands into sort of Paperspace commands, which is pretty straightforward. It's pretty much the exact same commands. You'll just do it from the command line rather than in a notebook. I'm happy to walk anyone through those things if you're going to do that. But Paperspace is far more expensive than Colab. Like Paperspace is, I think, 75 cents an hour, and Colab is $10 a month. So you can use Paperspace if you are a conscientious objector to Google, but it will definitely cost you more money. So just be aware of that. Yeah, so I won't cover training. If you want to talk about training during a co-working session, I'm more than happy to. But I just generally don't have a lot of new things. It's just sort of one of those things you like sort of have to do a lot and you sort of get a good feel for it. But if you are struggling with one of your training models and want to ask about how to fix it or like how to maybe do something better with it, like I'm definitely here to help with that. Just feel free to ask, but I just won't have any new material to cover during our lecture periods. And also, if you don't want to do training and you just want to use someone else's models, there's this really cool repo of awesome pre-trained StyleGAN 2 models that Justin Pinkney runs. There's like 20 or 30 models there, so you're welcome to just use those and just play with those if you want to. One note on the StyleGAN, I will be using the PyTorch repo. I know some of you previously were using like a TensorFlow repo with me. PyTorch is the newest one. The reason that I like using the PyTorch model is it's generally faster. The code is easier to read. And if you're doing training, I highly recommend the PyTorch version. It runs about 25% faster, so you can save yourself a lot of time and energy and all that sort of good stuff. So if you're new to the PyTorch repo, I don't think it'll feel that different. Just running scripts are pretty much the exact same process. Some of the commands are a little different that here or there. And again, I'm happy to walk people through those things if they're interested in that during a co-working session. And because I will be using Colab, if you're new to Colab, maybe if you've only used Runway before, Colab can feel a little tricky at first. The good news is that we won't really be doing anything too wild in it. It's just mostly running commands from like a command line style interface. But if you're interested in learning more about Colab or just trying to like sort of get used to it, this course, which is linked here, is like a 4-week class that I think Leah and I taught. And it will be, I hope it gives you like enough information to get started. We'll look at a little Colab stuff today. So if you just want to get your feet wet, this will be a good way to do that. And then again, as I mentioned, like we won't really be diving too deep into this material just yet. So you've got a couple weeks to sort of like get used to everything from there. So probably in week 3, I think we'll really start to dive deeper into StyleGAN and that sort of thing. Cool. So with that, why don't we take a break? So let's do 10 minutes. We'll come back at 35 after. And I would love if everyone, this whenisgood.net link that I posted in the chat, if you want to take like 2 minutes to just fill that out during break, that way we'll get a bunch of responses. And I can quickly pick some co-working times. So we'll come back in 10 minutes. So 35 after. So I'll see everyone in 10 minutes. So Grant asked to see the cats. This one's about to run away, I can tell. This is Pumpkin. She's the white one, fluffy one. She's quiet. Bug is the one you saw before. She's the brown one. She's loud. Yeah, you're gonna run away. Okay, bye. Yeah, so you'll definitely see many of those cats over the next couple weeks. And also, I used to have like a really HD webcam, and I realized all it did was show off all the cat fur that I wear around all day. So I've switched back to the lo-fi webcam. So were there any questions about material we'll cover for this week or any other questions before we jump into today's lesson? All right, I will take silence as a sign that we're doing okay. All right, so today we'll talk a little bit about how to make better data sets. So, there's sort of 2 ways to produce better models, right? In the world of machine learning, there's sort of 2 things that produce better models. One is a better model architecture, and 2 is better data sets. So it's actually true that like the better your data is, the better your model will be. Now, the downside of these is that like the first one requires quite a lot of technical knowledge. Maybe Jordan can work on it here. Maybe other folks, definitely smarter than me, can. But building a better architecture is actually really hard. So I find a lot of people who come in from like processing are like, show me how to write my own neural network. And it's sort of like, okay, like I can, but like you probably don't want to. The realistic truth is that there's research labs that spend every waking hour of their working lives building better model architecture. And while it's fun to sort of see how it works, like in general, if you really want to make the best model, like there are other people who will probably do better than you. And that's not to be mean or damn. Thank you, Nauko. I am supposed to be sharing my screen again, and I'm not doing it. I'm gonna get better at this. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, so as I mentioned, there's two ways to make better models. Like the model architecture is like generally the world of researchers and people that work at Google or NVIDIA or other places. So I don't generally cover in that class. I've been promising for like a year now that I will eventually do like a here's how to write your own neural network. And I've been sort of skipping it because it's a complicated area, and also honestly, it's like once you learn how to do it, it's great, but then you see how other people write theirs and you're like, wow, I'm totally behind on this. So in general, I would say like let others do this work. So StyleGAN may not eventually be the best model to use. I would say today it's actually still probably the best one. There's a couple that are starting to come up that are starting to look good that are competing with it, but for now, I think it's still the best. Where I think we can focus on is doing better data sets. One, because we're artists and like we have a trained visual eye for these sort of things that is actually an advantage over many researchers who are not artists. They go on the web and they scrape a bunch of stuff and they say, cool, I've got a data set. And we, as trained artists, can probably better differentiate why a data set might be good or bad. And there's sort of two ways to create better data sets. One is to get more data, which isn't always possible. For a lot of us, we're using our own artistic works as data sets. You could go and generate 10 more pieces in the next month, but you probably couldn't generate another 1,000. So this is sort of an issue of like, is there enough data or more data available to me? And then there's also this idea of making our data better. And that sounds great, but I think there's always a question about like, how do I actually do that? So we're gonna look at one way to do that today. So we'll start by just looking at FHQ. As I'm sure many of you are aware of, FHQ is sort of the model that sort of was used for the very first version of StyleGAN that sort of was like really wowing, and it's really surprised people how well it could produce images. FFHQ stands for Flickr Faces High Quality. Is like one of the higher resolution data sets out there. It's 1024 by 1024. And as you could hear from the name, it is scraped from Flickr. So the researchers at NVIDIA who made this went through and scraped thousands upon thousands of photos that were Creative Commons licensed on Flickr. There's some pushback now about that because I don't know that everyone who licenses their images as Creative Commons would expect it to end up in a data set that will now probably forever live on. But that's what they did. It's legally, I guess, okay, but it definitely has some questions ethically. But this is what FHQ looks like. So these are 8 images that come directly from the 70,000 image data set. So you'll see there are people wearing funny hats, people with glasses, people being kissed. This is the quality of the data set. And I would guess that if you're a portrait photographer, you're looking at these and be like, these are not good images. The lighting is weird, the poses are weird, but this is what they used. And what that produced is this model. So this is the FHQ model. I literally rendered this yesterday from their pre-trained model. And you will see you get people with glasses, people with funny hats, people where other faces are kind of in the corners, and you will generally, what you put in is what you get out, right? So these are maybe not the best lit photos. They're not the best, positioned, or they're not particularly good portraits, but it does look really good when it animates. And what it animates to look like is this. So when this model came out 3 or 4 years ago, people were shocked by the quality. And it's again because of the model architecture, but it's also because of the data set. So I'll talk about the trick that they use in just a minute, but FHQ actually is available as 2 different data sets. So one is this version, which is these cropped images. There is also a version called In the Wild. And what they usually mean by in the wild is the raw images that people grab from Flickr. So you can go on the GitHub account for FHQ and actually look at the data set. There are 70,000 raw images that are available. I went through and grabbed a handful. So these are 8 from that data set. So you'll see that it's drastically different, right? There are people smoking cigarettes with pencils in their ears. You get cosplay characters. You get more than one person in every photo. This was the raw data set they were working with. So imagine like us going on and scraping Instagram, that you would usually get something like this. So I actually trained this model. So I trained this for about 4 or 5 days on this data set. And here's what my results look like. Now, I would bet it would get better if I trained this for a longer period of time. But I think this highlights a really important part about how data works with these models, which is the better aligned or more similar your data set is going in, the easier the model will have a time of learning these things. So when you feed a data set that is all faces, sort of like at the same crop size, it's much easier to learn. If you feed a data set full of varying images at different scales, different number of people, different positions, you will get a very different output. And yeah, so what this looks like when you animate is something like this.
I have a quick question about this. Is this on top of the StyleGAN basics, so with the style transfer and everything already, or the already?
Yeah, so it's using
Okay.
It is using transfer learning, which just saved me
Okay.
about a week of time. But yeah, so that is worth noting that it is sort of like, you know, you might think that, well, this model can already generate faces, so why is it going and changing it? And it's because your data is different, right? You've got people at different scales, you've got people in different positions. So yeah, you are like, this is sort of this isn't a perfect example of trained from scratch learning, but I do think it still shows like just how different data coming in can change your images. And well, I bet if I train this for another week or two, I bet you it'll get better. It will get less weird and like there'll be less big ears everywhere. I don't expect it to look as good as FFHQ. One thing I also think is really interesting is when you hold these. So basically, the trick here is FFHQ does a thing called alignment. It used a machine learning model, which we'll actually look at today, that aligns all of our faces so that all of the eyes perfectly align. So when you put these images, like this, and you actually draw a line, you see the eyes almost perfectly. It's not perfect, but it's like pretty closely aligned. And what they also do is they try to scale up the face so that maybe the chins end in sort of the same positions. And the reason I think this is important is not just like this probably helps the model train better, but it also changes how the interpolation works. So when you actually look at these videos side by side, what you'll see is that in FHQ, the eyes stay sort of in a fixed position and everything rotates around them. Whereas in this version, the face is moving, the position of the faces is moving, you get stuff in different locations. So it also changes how the animation works. And this is not just like a better model, but it's also like, what do I want the animation to look like? What do I want the interpolation to look like? If you want this sort of cool effect where like some things stay static and other things move around it, you need to start to think about how you can align your data to do that itself. So that's what we're going to look at a little bit today is like what tools are available for us to do better image alignment. And I think, again, this is really important for like, you might actually look like the way that this looks animating. And in that case, it's just like, okay, well, let me just like use some unaligned data, but maybe I need to make sure that it works correctly using the right gamma settings or other settings. But on the other side, you might want something that animates in a particular way. And that means you need to think a lot harder about how your data is set up and how your images overlap and that sort of thing. Right, so these are just a couple examples of like FHQ, and it's like, well, that's great. Like, what if I'm not working with faces? Or what if I'm working with animal faces or other things, like other data that I need to like, is there a way for me to align these assets? And this is actually a pretty challenging question. Like there could be whole tools built around these things. And in fact, they've started building a couple and we'll look at them today. But this is one of the challenges. Like our data is not faces. Faces are not as easily, like if we're not using faces, our data is probably like much harder to come by, all of those sort of things. So there's a couple tools today that you could use. So the first is the Align Faces script. I'll demo this really quickly in class today. But if you're basically doing something with faces and you want something that looks like FFHQ, this is your best bet. And then there's another thing called YOLO, which is object detection. I won't cover that in class today because it's a long process. I've got a bunch of videos here if you want to do it. Object detection essentially allows you to sort of find boxes of similar objects in images, and basically you train a separate machine learning model to find those images, and then it gives you those boxes, and I've got a script that can convert those to crops. So I actually did that. I'm not sure if it'll be listed here, but I can just send a video around. So here's a couple of things about these two scripts. The Align Faces script is really great, but it assumes you want faces, and it assumes you want faces in the exact same sort of format as FFHQ, right? So the exact same sort of cropping. If you want a little bit of neck, you want some shoulders, this script won't really work for that. But if you do have faces and you want to quickly transfer from FHQ to what you're working on, I highly recommend using this tool. This is like the best way to get like really decent data sets, as well as get that nice interpolation effect. So object detection is a little bit better. One, it assumes your data is detectable, which isn't always true. If you have a really complex or complicated idea like abstract art, I don't know that an object detector is going to work. In my demo, I went through like how to find cat faces or how to find cat heads and like object detect those. And one thing I should note is that it doesn't really help with that alignment. Like the aligning eyes issue is something you're gonna have to like really work on. But this sort of helps with spacing. It helps sort of like find a similar crop size. So you might not have small heads and big heads, right? The head might always be the same size. So if you're interested in doing this, I definitely recommend checking out some of these videos. It is a fairly intensive process, but I do find it creates pretty interesting work. I don't think I have the video here. I'll share the video of what I did with the cats because I think it worked out pretty well. So this is a really interesting tool, and I'd highly recommend trying it if you're interested in sort of trying to find a better way to align your data set, but don't have like a specific like its faces or that sort of thing. But there's also some more generic or general ways to think about aligning our data, right? So one thing is you can think about radial alignment, which is like maybe there's a center point in the middle of your squares, and you want to align everything to that center point. So I do a lot of work with flowers. Maybe I take a flower shape, which is very circular, and I always align the thing by the same center point. That would be one way to think about it. Maybe you've got something like a leaf or some other shape that has like a bilateral alignment, and what you want to do is sort of like create a straight line, center everything on that straight line, and then animate from there. So this is sort of like the beginning of like almost like a language or a grammar for machine learning data sets, right? Like how do we align things in a way that like actually makes sense? Maybe you've got something like landscapes, and you want to align to sort of the baseline of horizontal plane of the land, right? So, and again, I should highlight all of this is about like sort of getting the right interpolation effect or just having your model train in a certain way. So if you just want sort of crazy noise, you can always just like throw stuff at the model and see what happens. But this is about maybe improving that and getting a little bit more control over how the model animates and interpolates. Any questions before we jump into some demos? All right. Quiet group again today. All right. So I realized that this align faces script actually links to the wrong thing. So I'm gonna share the link in our chat, and then I will also I'll update the slide deck a little bit after class. So that's the Python notebook that we're going to look at for this. So this just shows how to run the align faces script. So let me just reset my notebook from scratch here, and we'll go through each step. So align faces uses a machine learning model, and what it does what's called landmark detection. So in this case, it'll find the points of your eyes, it'll find the corners of your mouth, and I believe it might find the chin or like some part on your head. So there is a machine learning model that's been trained to like sort of detect these positions. And then what we'll do is we'll take a bunch of images and we'll sort of like run that through the process. So the first thing you'll need to do is you'll want to clone over the GitHub repo. I've got the script in my old ADA model. I don't think this is actually, I think I could move it over to the PyTorch one. I think this is fine to leave it here. This repo isn't going anywhere, so you're always welcome to use this notebook as the definitive sort of guide to doing it. So we'll go ahead and clone this over. One thing to note is that this also doesn't require a GPU. So technically you could run this in locally on your computer. The problem is it requires Keras, which can sometimes be a pain in the ass to install. So in general, like I think it's fine to leave this in Colab and just move stuff between Google Drive. So we've cloned our notebook our repo over. And there inside of this utils folder, there is a script called align faces. For whatever reason, this doesn't match up correctly with the import, so I just dumped the code here, and this will work just fine. So the next thing you'll need to do is you'll need to import a folder of images of faces. So I actually grabbed 50 images from that FHQ and the wild dataset, and I'm just going to import them using GDown. So again, if you're new to Colab and you haven't used GDown before, and you're interested in learning more, like let me know. I've got a course or video or two on using GDown. But basically, I've got a zip file that sits on Google Drive. And we're going to import it into Colab using gdown, and then we're going to unzip it. So this is, there's 50 images in here. So it looks like it's unzipping now. And each of these, this might take a minute to load in here. So wow, some of these images are huge, but you can see this is a face, right? So let's keep an eye on 18. So you'll see like this face is tilted, and what I hope the script is going to do is turn them upright and then align the eyes correctly. So once you've unzipped this folder, then what you've got down here is a bunch of code. And it's not super important to know what's going on here. The only two things you need to edit right now are the raw images dir, which is the directory that you're pointing where all of your current images are, and then the aligned images dir, which is where you're going to output all of your cropped images to. So this is already set up to work with this, but what you would do is if you had a different data set up here, you would just copy the path from this data set, and you would paste it into this path. And then you can set this to be whatever. I think output is fine. Basically, this is just going to generate a folder here in Colab, and it's going to save all of our images to it. So once you've edited those two lines, that's pretty much all you need to do for this script. And then you just run the cell here. What did I do wrong here? Oh, I think sorry, I didn't run this cell. So make sure you run this cell, which just moves you into this folder, just so that we can run this script from here. If you don't do that, you'll get an error because it doesn't know where all of the files it's looking for are. So now that I fixed that, you can go ahead and run this cell again. And it's going to download this thing called Shape Predictor 68 face landmarks. This is the machine learning model that it's looking for face landmarks with. And once this is downloaded, it's just going to start processing all of the faces. So if I refresh my folders over here, you'll see I'll get an output. And if I open this, this can take a little bit of time. So we'll just go ahead and let this run for a couple minutes. And as it runs, it will generate images in here for each face that it finds. Yeah. So you will probably see lots of people use this face landmarks detector. This is a pretty common tool that people will use for face detection. So you can run this on like a mobile browser. Like I would guess that if you're doing like face filters, like an Instagram or on any other sort of video tool, my guess is they're using something like this under the hood to determine where your eyes are, where your nose is, where your mouth is, to do those filtering processes. So there's a question about, is there a limit to the number of images I can upload as an input? Probably not. I will say that I do find Colab starts to get mad at you if you have a lot of images, like a ton of images. But I would say, like, unless you've got 50,000 images, you're probably fine. The challenge with Colab is it just takes a little bit of time to download and upload these files. So if you've got a lot of images, you might want to look into installing Keras and your computer locally to run this. I can provide some links to doing that if you're interested in it. But if you've got a couple of thousand images and they're saved to Google Drive already, then this process should be pretty straightforward, or like I might recommend using that over trying to install Keras locally.
I have a quick question. I was wondering, do you know what happens when the model can't detect a face, or it's like an image without a face? Will it like try to give you something?
That's a good question. I've only played with this a couple times. My guess is that it just skips it. So there is like a landmarks detector, and then it gets the raw image. And then I believe, let's see, align faces. Yeah, so it's saying 4 faces that it finds. So my guess if it doesn't find a face, it will just skip it. Now, what it finds as a face you might get some false positives, right? There's always a case where, like, I would be interested if you uploaded cat photos to this, if it could find faces because it's a cat, right? Like, again, people have done those Instagram filters and it like finds their cat's face in them, It basically looks for things that look like eyes, things that look for noses, and things that look like mouths. So it could find that in any number of other animals too, probably. So there are some false positives. This landmarks detector is, I believe, not really like a deep learning model. It's more like a, what we would call a shallow model, or like just a model that like operates more on pixels than it does on like sort of a deep layer network. So there's probably some false positives in this thing, and it will not be perfect, but it will be better than anything you could do by hand, and will certainly be faster than anything you do by hand in Photoshop. So I've refreshed a couple of these. So I've got some images here. So we can go ahead and just download these and see what we get. So there we've got our face. This looks pretty well aligned to what we expect. I bet if we look at the wild image, we could see like what the original looked like and if it was also good or not. Image 18 is going to be like the last one that renders here. So we'll see if we get to that.
And it probably goes without saying, expecting like two, like a front-facing, at least where you can see both eyes.
Yeah, it might work with a side profile, but my guess is that it probably mostly looks for like at best 3/4. But yeah, this is really meant for a very specific use case, which is essentially face detection, which security, privacy issues abound. But yeah, for this particular task, it works very well. So here you'll see the original image, which was much larger, right? Like you get full body, and it cropped it down to just that face. So this, again, it will match up very, very well with FFHQ. So if you're interested in transfer learning off that, this will be like one of the best ways to do that. I want to see if our person here. Nope. Okay. So that's pretty much it for the script. So once you're done, what you could do, I'll add some code here at the bottom, is you could zip up that folder. So if you want to say zip faces.zip, and then you want to just zip up this folder, you could do that. And then you could download it, or you could sync your Google Drive account and then upload it back to Google Drive. One thing I know about Colab is if you haven't played in Colab a lot, for whatever reason, upload-download time directly in Colab is slow compared to Google Drive. So I generally recommend if you have big files, move them to Google Drive and do upload-download there, and then like sort of using GDown or syncing, move them back and forth between Colab. I assume that's because people don't want people using Colab for weird, like big egress types of things, but who knows? It might just be a Google product issue. Yeah, so I'll let this run for a little bit longer, and then maybe we can look at what the output is from here. But I also want to jump into some of the other tools that are available. Are there any questions? Okay. So you've got this link. Happy to chat with anyone that is interested in using it, and we can walk through various tasks of that. Cool. So I want to quickly show a tool that I've been building recently, which does some of this more radial alignment and bilateral alignment. So I think many of you have probably already seen, but I have a tool called the Dataset Tools library, and I have been adding some new features into it that allow you to almost make an interactive cropping tool. So you could do a lot of stuff in Photoshop. It's just Photoshop is kind of slow, right? You have to open a file, click around, or maybe figure out your crops, do some guides, then make the crop, save it, open up another file. So I've been building some tools that are a little bit more lightweight, that you can just point at a folder and just automatically like do a bunch of stuff with sort of interactively. So I want to just show quickly how to do those two things using the Dataset Tools library. So the first one is the radial alignment tool. So radial is, again, imagine that it's like a flower, and you pick the middle point, and then you like want to drag out a circle around the outside of the petals, and then you want to crop to that. So this tool will allow you to click a center point, and then you drag out a square, and then you click again, and it crops it. And then we'll also look at the bilateral alignment. So bilateral, again, is imagine there's a line that splits your image, and you want to sort of crop there, and then you want to like rotate around that straight line. So we'll look at how to do that. This is pretty similar. Instead, you click to draw 2 points. So you click, drag out a line, click again, and then you drag out a square. So we'll take a look at these two tools. But one of the things I like about this is that it generates images that basically allow you to do this. So you can straighten an image relatively quickly. And if you imagine straightening all of your plant images to being more vertical, they will probably learn that that vertical line should be like, fixed, and then things will animate off of that. So again, we're trying to figure out like how do we create good interpolations or interpolations that are maybe more aesthetically pleasing or just make more sense to us. I always think about this like almost like an animator, right? An animator is not going to like animate from this to this when both the images could be this, and you can like show things that operate off of this. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. So for the Dataset Tools library, if you haven't installed this already, I have a bunch of installation instructions for this. But essentially, you'll want to run through the process of installing this and also get set up on Anaconda. That way, you've got some defaults you can install. So I'll link to the video for that. I'm going to make a note here for myself in the chat. Link to Dataset Tools install. So with that involved, like you'll use this locally on your own local computer. So we're going to do conda activate dataset tools, and this will just install. This will just like use all the code that we would need to install for this in its own environment. And then what we'll need to do is we'll need to find a folder of images that we want to go through and process individually. So I'm going to go ahead and just find a set of images on one of my hard drives here. I think I was showing people in my last class the insane amount of images and data that I have, but this is sort of how I organize all of my images. So we'll go through and we'll just grab one of these folders. So I'm just going to grab this. This is a folder of just a handful of flower images, and some of them aren't even flower images. Some of them are like weird people. So here's a good example of where like in this photo, I've got 4 flowers. But what I would love to do is just crop a box around each flower. So that's what we'll do here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to copy this path. So we'll click on the folder and we'll go Command C. Then we'll come back over to terminal and we'll do Python. And the script for this is called interactive because this is like an interactive cropping tool. Interactive. Yep, thanks. And then we'll do -I, which is for what's the input folder. So we'll paste in that path. We'll do -O for the output path, and this is going to be, I just always do /outputs, and then / and then we'll just do, I just do enter, which reminds me this is the interactive tool, and then like whatever this is, so label GIQUE, yeah. So I guess it's La Belgique vertical, yeah. So we'll use that, and then this is the basics of what we need to run. So if I just run this and hit return, what's going to happen is it's going to load all those folders. It's going to load all the images in that data set into this interactive window, which I can then interact with and play with. One thing to note is this is a little slow to begin with because it's loading every image in. This is my own hacky tool, so there's probably ways to optimize this. I think Dusk and I were previously talking about, what if it loaded in the images sequentially, one at a time, that sort of thing. So I think there's lots of ways that we can improve this. So maybe people can be my QA analysts and help me figure out what needs to be improved in this. But in the meantime, this is just loading a bunch of images. It does take a little bit of time because these are also high res images. So while this loads, why don't I show you some of the options that are available with these tools. Go ahead, Grant.
What's the front end implemented in, out of curiosity?
It's OpenCV, so it's just using like default OpenCV tools. Yeah. So we already use the input and output folders. So there's also a mode. So we'll look at the mode. The mode is either radial or bilateral. In this, it's just called center because I didn't think about it as radial. It's just centering. That's the default. There are options for file extensions. This is what sort of file output do you want to save it as. It's either a PNG or a JPEG. Min, which is how small do we want to make the images when we do the cropping. So by default, it's going to look for 1024 by 1024. Here we go. This is loading up finally. So when this loads, I'll come back to those defaults because we'll play with them in a minute. When this loads, you've got an image here, and I don't want to do anything with this image. So what I can do is I can press spacebar. Spacebar will go to the next image. I do want to do stuff with this image. So the way this tool works is you just click in your center point, and then you will drag out a square. And as you drag out, the red means that it is smaller than your minimum size. When you hit blue, that means it is matched to your max size. So if you're ever wondering, like, is this a big enough image for my data set, that sort of thing, you can set this. Once it's set to the base of the crop area, you can just hit click, and it will turn green, which means it saved it out. So now I can do this for these other images. So click here, drag this out, and I'll hit click. And when I do this one, I'll drag this one out, and I will hit click and crop. And when I do this one again, so this one's got a funny issue because I want to crop to this, but I don't have enough space to the left of my image. So I'll show you how to fix that in just a minute. But essentially, like, one challenge is like you've got to figure out, like, is there enough data in my images to make this happen? So if I click there, that'll just save that out. So I can move on to the next image by hitting spacebar. If I want to go backwards, I can hit L. So spacebar goes forward, L goes backwards. When you reach the end of your images, there's a lot more images in here than I remember. It'll just stop. So when you go back to the console, you'll see that it just, like, it errored out. I don't know why it errors out. It should just exit, but it doesn't. So when I go back now to my dataset folder, which was over here, and outputs, and it was in Inter La Belgique, you'll see I've got cropped images. So this is hopefully easier than Photoshop. It should be faster and easier than Photoshop. Now, one thing I'll note here is all of my images, the sizes themselves, are not the same as what I want my crop size to be, right? This is 1084 by 1084. So there's a way to fix that. So if we go back over to the console, or the terminal, and we hit up, there's a couple things we can fix here. So first off is min. So let's say you're doing 512 by 512. You could set that to 512. All that's going to do is change that red and blue box. So if you want to do a smaller data set, you can. I'll leave it at 1024. If we come back over here, there are a couple other options. So there is a thing called guides. And if we use guides, what guides are going to do is they're going to add guides to the edges of our images that are half of the distance of min, so that way we know anything outside of that space we probably shouldn't be clicking on because it won't create an image that is square. I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. There's also post, this is post-processing. So remember, what we would ideally like is just a data set that's all 1024 by 1024. And right now it's just cropping to whatever square size I set. So if you do post resize, and then you run this again, what you will get is it'll resize your images to 1024 on each crop size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to this folder. I'm going to only take 2 or 3 images from this so it doesn't load as slowly.
Will it upscale too, or just downscale?
I think right now it just downscales, but it probably could be set to upscale. Upscale's a little gnarly because it'll get blurry the further it goes. So you just want to be a little careful with that. So I'm just going to add these images to this folder, and let's run this again with these settings. So we'll change out our folder path here. And hopefully this loads a little bit faster. So there's also another option here, which we'll look at one example of, which is padding. And what padding does is you can sort of see it here in this example. Oh, that was way faster. Okay, so now you'll see that I've got guides here, right? So these guides are essentially saying, like, if you click in this space, you're not going to be able to meet that 1024 by 1024 area, which I just find helpful for me, because sometimes I've got an image that's really close to that edge, and I'm like, can I or can I not? So it's just sort of a helpful little guide. But like here, obviously I can click on the center here of this and just drag this out, and it's fine, right? It'll kind of work. So that's one option. And if I click here, I should be able to see, if I go back to my outputs folder, I will see this image, and this image has been correctly resized to 1024 by 1024. So again, to do this in Photoshop is like a bunch of steps. All of this has been hopefully automated away to make it a little bit easier for you. So let me show you what the padding does. So if we just exit out of this, so if you go back to terminal, To quit out of any terminal application, just hit Control-C. That's going to quit it. So let's do up, and then we'll add padding. So let's do just do 512 of pixel padding. So what this is going to do is going to add a bright green border around all of my images. And you might be like, that's crazy. Why are you doing that? And I'll show you in just a minute. So this is going to add a little bit of padding to all of our images, which then means anything at that edge you can add to, right? So if you've got an image you want to crop from the edge of, it's fairly easy to do that because there's now all this padding. And I'll show you how to remove that bright green in just a second. Of course, now this one's loading slower. There we go. Okay, so now we have all this all these edges here, right? So let's just find another image, like maybe this one for whatever reason. Maybe it were to actually go off the edge of my crop. Actually, that's exactly what happens here, right? So this is the right crop that I want, but normally there'd be no image data to the right of this image on this side. So if I just click here and hit crop, you'll see what happens is I get this image that opens, and it's got this bright green edge. And one of the funny tricks that I've sort of learned is if I open this in Photoshop, let's see how slow it takes for Photoshop to open on my computer. So what I do is I actually have a script that runs through it and grabs any bright green pixels. It turns that into a selection, and then I use the content aware fill to sort of like turn it into whatever texture is nearby it. So this is sort of a nice other little tip or trick to like make use of the data you have and not be too limited. Like we'll look at an example of this and it probably won't look perfect, but it will look better than like, you know, trying to Photoshop or like just using a flat color in that space. Of course, Photoshop is going to take a minute here to open.
Can people reflect the image too? So it's sort of extended. Does that work well, or is that?
Yeah, you could. One of the challenges in this particular image, you would see that if it reflected, you'd get a little bit of flower to the right of it. And what I'm hoping here is with this image, you won't get that. So let's see here.
It'd be easy to automate the adding the reflection part, but the content aware stuff not quite so much.
Yeah, so let's see here. Of course, Photoshop is going to be mad at me for trying to open all these tools at once. Let me see if I quit out of my terminal application if this loads faster. Okay, so if I go to Window and Actions, and then I come down here, I have a green CAF, which is green content aware fill. So if I hit this button, so maybe not the best looking at this in hindsight. Also, maybe that script needs to like take a little bit more of that area. I can maybe play with that script a little bit, but you'll see that what it does is sort of adds a little bit of texture, and like this isn't perfect. On other images it might be better, but it does sort of remove that green border. And there's a way to run this as a batch action. So usually what I'll do is I'll do this on 100, 150 images, and then I'll filter out or sort the ones that have the green in them into another folder, and then I'll just run a batch action on that. So again, like these are some nice tips and tricks that I've sort of learned over time to sort of help like massage our data into slightly better results. Yeah, so I mean, you know, this is sort of one of the challenges with these tools is that they're never perfect, but it's like, will it save me time and will it save me a lot of energy and will it get me in a better place than I would be by doing it by hand or like trying to automate some tool that didn't work? Like that's sort of the challenge here. So, you know, I think this tool works okay-ish. I built it like a month ago and I've been playing with it a lot. And I think there's lots of improvements to be done to it, but I think it will be better than Photoshop for a lot of people. Also, Photoshop, if you don't already have it, it's pretty expensive. So this being a free tool is maybe enough to get you going. So yeah, so that's the radial tool. The bilateral tool works pretty much the same way. I don't know that we're going to really have. Let me see if I have a couple different. Maybe what I'll do is I'll do on that data set. There's a couple other images that are leaves. There was one that was like all leaves, right? well, let me just grab a couple of these. Maybe this will work fine. So let's look at the yeah, okay, so this is perfect. Let's look at the bilateral version. So I'm gonna make a new folder here. We'll call it leaves. Paste those images in there. Let's copy this path. So this is pretty much the exact same tool. All we're gonna do is we're gonna change out the mode. So you're gonna do -M, and then we'll do bilateral. Now you can also hit M inside of the tool itself. So if you want to have both bilateral and radial images, you can switch between that. That's kind of a hidden feature that I need to make a better GUI for this entire thing if you haven't noticed. But this will basically now run in the bilateral mode instead of in the radial mode. And I'll show you how that works in just a second. So let me swap out my input path, and I'll just leave my output path as the same. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so for this version, all it does is it does instead of one click for the center, it does 2 clicks. So the first thing you'll do is you'll click at the base of the image. So one thing is order of operations matters. So your first click will be the bottom, and your next click will be the top of the image. So what we're going to do here is we're going to click here for the base, and then we're going to see how there's a little blue line here. So we'll draw out a line to where the top of the leaf is. We'll click again, and then we'll drag out a box, and we'll hit click, return. And let's see, are there other good images? So we'll do this one. So we'll do click for the base of the leaf here, and we'll do, I guess, maybe up here. This is one of those things that it's not perfect data. And we'll drag out a line. So what this does, it also rotates. So I find this helpful because, again, all of your data, like ideally, should be somehow structured in a similar visual way. So I've created 2 boxes there. Let's see if we have, so here's another couple good leaves to use. So in this case, we'll click here sort of toward the base. This one, you have to kind of feel your way out a little bit more with this because this kind of determines top and bottom of the images. So we'll do base, we'll do click. This I can definitely, so I should have made my padding bigger, but I'll just click this and leave it as is for now. We'll do another one here for this leaf. So we'll click here and here, drag out a box. And we'll do like here and here. And we'll have to squish our box. Cool, so when we're done with this, we go back here. We will see. Okay, let's clear these out of here. So we'll see that all of our leaves are now structured in a way where they're all pointing right side up. And they're all kind of sort of, the hope is that they're all sort of like, maybe the base point is in the same place. My guess is that it's not perfect in this case, but it's close-ish. It's better than it would be if I were to try to do it by hand. So that's obviously an unnecessary image. So I could begin to build like a leaf animating data set. And maybe if I were like to go really far, like maybe what I would even do is I would even, go in and Photoshop out some of these other materials. So I just had a single leaf. That's like extra credit version. I actually think it's kind of fun to see stuff animate in and out. So these are, this is just 2 simple tools that I've built. But I think that they will eventually, I think this will help for many people who have sort of like maybe really simple ways to align images together. And you'll see here again, like this could be a thing where I just take this and put this into Photoshop to remove sort of the bright green areas. So yeah, so these are some beginning tools to begin to think about how to better align your images. So that's sort of it for today's lecture. Obviously your homework is, if you have a data set, start to think about how you might begin to align these things. Maybe you can align stuff, like I personally have found this tool saves me a ton of time. Like I was able to make a 2,000 image data set in a couple hours that would usually probably take me a day. So I was able to just get that up in training. So personally, I'm also going to do this. This is my homework as well for next week. So I'm going to actually probably maybe do a leaf data set and just sort of like see how that trains using that tool. But I would definitely recommend playing with these tools and seeing what you can get. I'd also say like maybe you've got other ways to think about aligning stuff and there isn't a tool yet to match that. And you know, maybe you want to ask in the group. I know Dusk is really good at making some tools. I'm happy to give some attempts at making some tools this week. Maybe there are other people who are interested in helping. Maybe there's something else we should be building to make better alignment systems. Maybe there's some machine learning tools we could look at. So, you know, this is sort of more like start to think about how you might want to align your data sets. And again, also think about how you want stuff to animate. Like, I think that's also another key part. Like, what if you were to take, what if you were to take the FHQ data set and align it by hairline or something? Like, what would that actually look like? It would probably animate very differently. Or what if it purely animated by mouth? Then you've got eyes in different places and other weird things. So I think there's lots of opportunities to think about how alignment can be better utilized to actually produce different types of animations. Yeah. Okay, so of course I said, like, I'll do a lecture in an hour and a half, and I did it in an hour and 50 minutes. But if anyone wants to stick around and ask questions or anything, I'm happy to stick around. I know for some of you it's pretty late, so please don't ever feel like you have to stick around for Q&A. If there's anything that comes up that's really important, I'll like note it in our class list and add links to stuff. So if you do need to take off, I'm more than understanding about that. But if anyone has questions about either these tools or maybe other things, or you know, if anyone wants to dig into the code underneath this setting, I'm happy to walk through that stuff. So if you do need to leave, again, the homework is here. It's just sort of like play with stuff. I should mention also we'll be doing more dataset stuff next week. So if you do have other datasets you've been playing with or toying with, maybe bring those to class next week, and we start to think about like how we can better update those for next week as well. So maybe just make a dataset and sort of play with it and see where you can get between now and next week.
Do you have any guidelines on minimum sizes for datasets to start with?
Yeah, so I generally recommend your dataset have at least 500 images in it. That's probably the smallest you can go. You can go a little bit lower with the newest StyleGAN models, but not too much lower. So I'd say, you know, shoot for that. There's tricks you can do like mirroring. So the FHQ model is 70,000 images total, but it's actually 140,000 because they flip all the images left to right. So if you can do stuff like mirroring, that will always increase your data set a little bit further. But to varying degrees of efficacy, I would actually say like sometimes I find that turning off mirroring produces better results. Because if with a small data set, again, sort of like learn mirroring. Bug, you're killing me here. Where are you? It can just be like, it can produce sort of like weird little mirroring effects. So I wouldn't rely on mirroring. I would try to get as much data as you can before calling it quits, essentially. So Peter asked about more sample data sets. So a really great data set site that I recommend checking out is Kaggle. It's kaggle.com. Clearly, I was looking at this the other day. So Kaggle is a machine learning competition site. Basically, like companies will put up bounties or like a competition, and they'll say whoever can produce the best mountain detection system will win $25,000 from us. And usually they will also save their data sets. So this is a fingerprint data set that someone uploaded. So I was trying to play with this the other day. It's pretty small images, but there's a lot of them. I think it's like 128 by 128, and they're bitmaps. So you can actually make bitmaps a little bit bigger. But if you just Google, if you like search through Kaggle and search for like leafs, like I bet you there's a leaf data set on here. Yeah, leaf classification. Sometimes they delete the data sets after it's done. Other times they don't. It's always just kind of like hard to tell. You do have to make an account. Yeah, it's basically spec work. I mean, it's kind of spec work. It's kind of not. They do tend to pay fairly for these, but it is sort of like a competition site. And like, yeah, I guess people doing stuff on spec is like kind of the name of the game, but it's also like lots of people use it for, a lot of machine learning students use it to begin to like learn how to build better tools, that sort of thing. But there's lots of data on here. So if you just do a search, you'll often find data sets for things. Google also has a data set repository. And this is searchable data sets. Again, I bet if I type in leaf, you will find different things. Now, sometimes these are not images, sometimes they're text, sometimes they're other things. I'll also say most researchers are fine with 256 by 256 or smaller, which most of us as artists find really frustrating. So you might have challenges looking for larger image data sets. The other thing, and this is something that I've taught in a previous class, is using like an image scraper. So I've got a class on entirely how to like find data. So I'll add a link to that in our class notes as well. That'll walk through how to do scraping Instagram, scraping Flickr, a couple other sites, as well as how to write your own scraper. If you have some Python knowledge, you can probably write your own scraper using a tool called, what is it called? BS4? Beautiful Soup 4? Yeah, Beautiful Soup, yeah. So that's also an option. Again, that's probably more than you should imagine doing in a week, but if you are interested in that, that's another great way to find more data sets.
I'll put it in the Slack, but I think the Instagram scraper that you shared in a previous video is outdated. And I found a new one that I think I've been using to more effect without getting locked out. But anyways.
Yeah, I've started to get locked out of that Instagram scraper that I did use. Yeah, it uses the API and it like dings your account if you like scrape too hard. So one of the challenges with scraping is that there are other people at those tech companies who are also trying to get you to not scrape images. So there's lots of challenges. I will say I think the Flickr scraper is like a really solid tool. And also there's lots of images on Flickr that no one looks at anymore. So there's lots of like good data on there. And actually, Emily, who is a former student of mine, added a feature where you can scrape purely by Creative Commons license. So if you are more interested in the ethics of scraping, being able to scrape the Creative Commons and like only get people who are willing to let you use stuff for either creative reuse or remix, or even use it for I guess, what is it? I forget what the terminology is, but basically like to make money off of it is useful. I'll post a link to that as well. Let me add a note here for Creative Commons. So there's lots of options for scraping things. I tend to take a little bit of an approach of, in this class, you can do whatever you want as long as it's not like actually hurting people. I think you should be able to scrape public museums because you're paying for them to house all these collections. Also for this class, again, if you're not making money off it, I feel like you have a little bit more leeway on things. But yeah, there's tons of things that you can scrape or whatever off the web. And if you are really crazy like me, you can start to buy books and just scan in books. I have a whole stack of books by me that I have been slowly scanning away. Books are amazing data sets. And they're often things that do not exist on the web. So that's always an option too.
Are there tools for maybe scraping like a subreddit, like on Reddit? Because there's very like specific subreddits. So I imagine there's some good tools for that.
Yeah, there's got to be some good scraping tools for Reddit. I can look around and see. I haven't really seen anything in particular, but there's got to be, because that's like, I know like OpenAI, which is one of the big labs, like all their data is scraped from Reddit and other places. So there's definitely some tools out there that should exist. Usually if you just go to GitHub and you do like Reddit scraper, I'm sure something will pop up.
Yeah, I looked into this a couple of weeks ago. There was there's like a Reddit archiver where you like input which things you want to archive, and then it'll just like dump it. Like it's really nice because it does multi-threaded, so it'll go off and like do like tons and tons of images. The one disadvantage is it looks like it's like capped at a certain amount unless you like do some workarounds, but I can send a link to that.
To what they said, there's the keyword archive is really interesting because archiving and scraping are, depending on which perspective you're looking at, really equivalent. Like Twitter has an archival function for your own tweets instead of, so you don't have to scrape your own content if you want. So yeah, that was a really keen observation there.
Yeah, I mean, essentially anything on the web can be scraped unless like, someone is like really, really good about DRM and things. There's some ethics issues around what are you scraping and what are you going to do with the data once you have it. But in general, in some way or another, you can probably get most of the data out of a thing if you want it.
Well, there's always the analog loophole where you just point a webcam at your screen.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of this stuff is just easier than other things. I think like the bigger the site is, the more likely there are tools to pull stuff down from it. One downside of something like Reddit, I can imagine, is that you're going to get varying sizes of images. Or like, I don't know if they use a lot of like image hosting services for those tools. And it's like, I don't know if it goes and scrapes the image hosting as well or not. Like, so there's always like, the wider your sources, the more likely you are to get like lots of messy and dirty data, and then you've got to clean it up, right? So it's like, then you're either using a tool like this where you're trying to like, draw boxes around things to crop, or you're using object detection tools and trying to automate cleaning things up. So it's just sort of like, how wide of a net do you want to cast, and then how much time do you want to spend cleaning things up? So there's lots of tools and lots of options, and it's all just how much time do you have and how really, really interested in this topic are you?
Have you found any good models for image detection? If you want to give it a set of, I'm like using the leaf example, feed it a bunch of leaves, and I want to be able to detect leaves in other data sets.
Yeah, so actually we'll look at one option for that next week. So we're going to look at using Clip, which is a image to text detector, or like image to text classifier. Clip is a really cool model because it can sort of it's like a Swiss Army knife for images and text. So we'll actually look at an example of that where basically like you can feed in a text prompt and it will like output the likelihood of that being in your image. So we'll look at an example of that next week. There are probably lots of other classifiers as well. One of the downsides of most classifiers is that they're trained on a very specific data set. So if the thing you're looking for is not in that data set, it will not know it exists. So like there's usually, I think most people use, I think it's ImageNet, which I believe has like 1001 categories of like types of fish, types of elephants. But if you're like, I want abstract paintings, it has no concept of what an abstract painting is. So that's one of the challenges with some of these classifiers. Clip is pretty cool / scary in that it knows a lot of stuff, because it's basically like, this is a place where it's been trained on Reddit and like other big, huge repositories. We'll talk about this more next week, but OpenAI's deal is basically like, they believe the entire internet can be scraped and that a machine learning model can be trained on the entire internet, warts and all, mostly warts. So they just scrape a ton. Yeah, Clip is biased as hell too. They scrape a ton of data. We'll look at how to maybe like use that for our advantage. But there's also lots of dark corners of Clip as well. It knows a lot of racism, so it's pretty scary sometimes. But yeah, like I think that's starting to becoming like the newer direction that a lot of these companies are headed in, both fortunately and unfortunately, is these sort of more open-ended, like generalizable tools that you could say like, show me, like I think Adam and I were talking about this previously. It's like, show me chairs on white backgrounds. And it would find all the chairs on white backgrounds. And that's like really cool, but then you could be like, show me only black people making stupid faces. And now you've got a really scary model, right? So this is the challenge of a lot of these tools. And we'll cover a little bit more of that next week, but I think there's going to be lots and lots more of these sort of things available to us very soon.
All right, so I got another question. We were talking about lack of high resolution sources for data. Have you ever experimented with using like ESR? Yeah, I'm sure you used it a lot, but have you used it to upsample low quality data for training purposes? And have you met with any success with that?
Yeah, so actually I had a student in my ITP class this winter who did that. And I actually thought they had pretty good results. The challenge is always, are you going from 512 to 1024, or are you going from 96 to 1024, right? It's like, how far are you going? Is it just like a slight modification? Those tools can work pretty well. The tool I generally recommend is Gigapixel AI, which I'll post a link to this. I also have, I feel like I should I should just like post my link. I have like a referral code for them, and I swear I'm not recommending it because of the referral code. I'm recommending it because it's actually like my favorite tool. It's by this place called Topaz Labs, and the reason I like this is, again, this case of like, how do you make models better? Is it through better architecture or through better data sets? And what Topaz Labs has done is they've leaned heavily into better data sets. So they are a photography company, and they work with really high-end photographers. So they get really beautiful photographs, and they use that as their data sets. So I find Gigapixel to be the best image upreser because the data is trained on really nice images, right? It's not like crappy photos from the internet like that someone just scraped. It's really trained on like really high quality photographs. So I think Nowco, you've also used their video enhancer. They have a video tool that's a little bit more expensive that does video upresing. The downside is the tools feel a little, they're a little horsey. Like, they're definitely not Adobe. They're like a little janky. They crash a lot. They like don't look that pretty. You're like kind of like, should I trust this company? They're still better than a lot of other tools that are out there, but they definitely look a little funny.
Well, that's how you know you're on the cutting edge. That's how
Yes.
you're on the vanguard, because everything is so janky. Yes.
They also have like a 30-day trial free that's like there's no watermarks or anything. So maybe I've been doing that a couple times in a row now.
Maybe use the Gmail plus hack. Yeah. They also quite often offer sales. So if you like give them your email address, they will bug you when they have a sale. And the sales are like 25% off, which like is pretty decent. I think Gigapixel is like $100, and it's basically guaranteed to give you at least a year of like their license, and they do updates fairly frequently. At some point, they sort of are like, "Hey, you're done, and you have to pay again." So it's a little annoying in that regard, but it's like, honestly, it's hands down the best tool that is out there for this. Everyone tries to do some of the research upresing tools, and they're just not nearly as good.
But so going back to the original point, that's a Romulan approach for doing cooking up data for training.
Yeah, so this would work. It's okay. I mean, it's not ideal. Like, basically, I would say like the ideal would be like you actually have high res images. But if you're going like 512 to 1024 here, I think it's worthwhile. The other thing I should note is that if you have, let's say, a bunch of images and 80% of your data is 512 by 512, and you've got 20% of 1024 by 1024, just do the 512 model. Because the other thing you do is you could train a model at a smaller size and then do the upresing after. That also works. If you train a model at 512, it's going to train faster than at a 1024. So if you're 50-50, then you might want to make a decision. And if you've got 400 images that are 1024 and 100 that are smaller than that, then you might want to move to the 1024 version. But yeah, there's lots of different orders of operations. And I would say like just work around like what data you have available to you.
Your dataset tools don't work in Colab, right? Like I have to run it locally. Like
I think you have to run
interface stuff.
Yeah, I think you have to run it locally because I don't think there's any way to operate that in Colab. You could also run on Paperspace, or like honestly, if you could run it on any cloud computer because it doesn't require a GPU. So you could also, if you like, I don't know, if you like rent some like really low price low price non-GPU cloud service, and you could like SSH in to like view the windows, you could use that as well.
Cool. I was gonna say, if anybody's interested, if you're looking for a data set to make, the thing I figured out a little while ago is on my iPhone, it's classified all the photos of me. You've probably seen your photos all together, like it's gone through all your photos. You can go into that and then you can download all of your photos of yourself. And then you can run that same script that Derek just showed. And you can like, whatever, make a GAN of yourself if that's a weird thing you want to do like me.
I think Dusk did that earlier too. So yeah, I think there's lots of cool options with those. I'll be honest, I'm biased against not working on face stuff. So, if anyone wants to do like wave to lip or other things with face stuff, I'll do it for this class. It's just I tend to avoid face things just in my own practice. But if anyone is interested in that, I'm happy to like share some materials around that.
We were talking about horizontal mirroring. I want to see someone do the face with vertical mirroring. That's what I want to see. I want to see some forehead mounts.
Yeah, I will say I shared a link to that FFHQ in the wild. I'll share some images from that after a day of training, and it was really creepy. Like there were like double heads on things. Like it was very strange because the way those things work is they try to find convolutions that match. So there would be like a head attached to an ear, attached to a head, attached to an ear. It got very trippy, but it's pretty interesting and funny. And there's lots of stuff you could do that would sort of mess with data, right? Like if you don't want perfect images, you're in an even better place because StyleGAN is gonna be great for that. It's just if you want that real, like it almost looks real kind of thing, that's where you have to really worry about alignment and things.
Oh, okay. Here's another question. So there's a lot of resources that you have pertaining particularly to StyleGAN 1. Are there any caveats about applying that directly to StyleGAN 2 stuff? I guess mentioning that training you can get by with fewer iterations in a lot of cases, but any other notes you would or warnings about applying previous course materials to this one?
No, I would just say try to find the most up-to-date version of things because in general it will be faster and better. So there is like I don't know that I have StyleGAN 1 material. I think I have StyleGAN 2, which was the very I don't know. There's StyleGAN 2, there's StyleGAN 2 ADA, and there's StyleGAN 2 ADA PyTorch. That's sort of the iteration process. Find stuff in the PyTorch version that will generally be the best, just because it's going to be the fastest. But for the other thing that's nice about the PyTorch version is if you use the TensorFlow version, I had to make those really huge TF records files. PyTorch just requires a zip of images. So there's no like generating like 50 gigabytes of TensorFlow records files, which are very, very annoying. So what I can also do is I will link to the class that Mackenzie and Yugaso took. That there's some that's sort of the latest and greatest, and I just haven't put those up publicly on YouTube yet. But if anyone wants to dig through those, that's like a 10-week class. If anyone wants to dig through that stuff, I'll send them. I'll post the links to that, and you can go ahead and watch those videos. That class was also a mix of style transfer, like Munit, other models. So you might just want to skip around until you find the StyleGAN stuff that is most pertinent to that. I'll try to. I think it should be noted in the headlines, but you might just want to quickly scan around the videos to find the latest and greatest of those things. Okay, so I think we're at 9:45, so I think we should call it an evening. So I'll get the recording from this in probably a couple hours, and I'll post it to our Slack channel. If you have other questions, please feel free to post them in Slack, and I will try to answer them as soon as I can. And then, yeah, I would just try to recommend play with some data sets, play with some of these tools. If you've run into bugs and or issues, let me know, and I spend a couple hours a week on my Dataset Tools library, so if I can squeeze some bug fixes in or other things, I'm happy to do that. And yeah, I would also love to hear hey, I've got this data set, and I think the best way to align this would be to do this. How would I do that? I would love to churn some wheels on how to do that. In many cases, I will not have good answers, but I'm happy to look at it and try to figure it out. Cool. All right. So unless there's anything else, I will see everyone next week. All right. Bye, everybody.
Night.